All right. Welcome to the Deconstructing Data podcast. I'm Jessie Lezak, CMO at BDEX, along with co-host Joshua Morgan, marketing extraordinaire, and of course, David Finkelstein, BDEX's co-founder and CEO. Today's guest is Pasha Irshad. He is co-founder at Shape and where he helps teams identify market opportunities. I'm sorry, I said Shape and Scale if you didn't hear me. Shape and Scale, where he helps identify teams and identify market opportunities, as well as transform ideas into digital marketing solutions to Fortune 500 clients, including some I saw, Verizon Wireless, Microsoft, just to name a few, Deloitte. So thank you so much for being here, Pasha. And could you just start from the beginning and give a little justice to yourself and tell us your whole story, and also what you do as co-founder at Shape and Scale?
Yeah, would love to. It's funny because Joshua Morgan is probably one of the first people I met on LinkedIn and talked to, and now I think we encounter each other at least a couple times a week. So I'm really happy to be here.
And could you just start from the beginning and
Oh, sorry, I've had a little audio issue there. No, but so at Shape and Scale, I'm Pasha Irshad. We really help orchestrate growth for companies looking to scale their GTM, and that's across marketing, communications through modern PR, and then HubSpot. And so I've got about 13 years in the industry. I actually started my career in restaurant and the bar industry, which I think prepared me for marketing and everything that goes on in that. And I've got a varied background, and I think it's similar to a lot of the people in this on this call today. Cut my teeth in project management, which gave me a good, I think, baseline for marketing, right? Just keeping everything in front of me. From there, I segued really heavily into advertising. That was the main focal point of my last agency. And then as of the last couple of years, that's really focused to encompass marketing technology, HubSpot partner, and then really realizing those kind of solutions for my clients.
That's great, Pasha. Great to meet you. Thank you for joining us today. We talked a little bit offline about marketing data, so we're going to dive right into that. One of the things that came up is the fact that there's more walled gardens now. Part of that obviously is because of all the changes going on in marketing today, tracking cookies and all the things that everybody's been talking about, obviously. But I want to talk to you a little bit about, maybe get your feedback on how you feel about how authentic experiences can drive the collection of zero-party data and how that can be used for effective marketing.
Yeah, definitely. So it's funny, like we have these, we have first-party data, which is collected through your customer base, second-party data, which is first-party data sold, and then the evil stepsister, which is third-party data, which can be gotten by ill means, right? And I think when it comes to zero-party data, there is a level of authenticity there in that you are getting this data from your clients, or I'm sorry, from prospects through experiences. And what are those experiences? So let's start with an example. I'm big into fitness gear, like probably everybody is. When you go to your favorite D2C brand, what's usually going to happen is you might get a survey and say, hey, what size are you? What do you like? Do you prefer running? Do you prefer weightlifting? Do you prefer CrossFit? Once you start giving that data, it's a very authentic exchange because it's something that's interesting to you, right? Like you have a passion for fitness, you're on their website, you're giving this data, but what that data is allowing that company to do is offer a personalized experience to you later down the road, right? It's much more than an email for an ebook. And so, especially in the B2C world and D2C, where things are so competitive, being able to have that personalized data can give you the edge, right, to get to your customers.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot on this podcast about not just the importance of collecting that data and understanding how to use it, but the transparency that's required in order to collect that data, right? I mean, building the relationship with the customer so that they understand why you're collecting that data, how it's going to be used, and how they're going to benefit from it. And so I think that's really important going forward, right? Is that sort of value exchange that the brand has with the consumer in order to get them to sort of give up that information so that they can provide that improved experience.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting point to note there when it comes to D2C brands. They do a great job of not only marketing themselves in traditional ways, but influencer branding, right? So let's take 10,000, which is probably one of my favorite fitness brands.
Which one? What did
It's
you call it?
10,000. 10,000. So they're like men's athletic brand.
Okay.
Really great shorts. They started off pretty small and they've scaled. But what they do is they partner with fitness influencers, right? And those fitness influencers span a wide range of different activities, right? You've got CrossFit, you've got, they've even got like, military there now through like tactical shorts. But in doing so, I, as the consumer, right? It's like with Jessie and BDEX, I knew Jessie before I met her, right? So there's this trust factor built in. And so it's the same thing with this brand. There's an element of trust, right? I like it. They obviously know what I like. When I come to their site and then I see hey, what's your favorite sport? I'm much more receptive to giving them their information. And there is an element of trust there, right? I have to juxtapose it with B2B where everybody slaughters gated content. I'm one of those people. But there it's like you're going to get an ebook and then you are going to give them your email and then you're going to get 30 automated emails, maybe a couple calls. So you like know what's coming, right? Whereas in B2C, I think you're going to get something of value. Like you're going to get, and this is a point you made in the first podcast you guys ever did, David, you're going to get like this element of, and I just lost my train of thought. You're going to get this element. Well, it's an element of authenticity, but you're also going to get something of value. And that's really what it is, right? Like that element of value. I'm going to get every day a personalized offer of my favorite shorts. And so I think there's a big takeaway from that. And so I see first party data as the bridge between authenticity and really just good customer experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say, Josh, for your reference, I don't know if you noticed, but Pasha's in your camp.
Yes.
You know why I'm saying that?
Yeah.
He says he said we say data, he says data.
Yeah.
Well, and it's
data.
I was just about to message Jessie and go, "Hey, look, somebody I so,
I never even noticed that, but I'm gonna be aware of it now.
Well, I think it stems from watching so much Star Trek, and I just hear data. And then in the education world, because this is we connected a while back because
Yep.
you were a pivoter at one point. I was pivoting, and before you went off to kind of co-found your own agency, and in the education world, like depending on who's doing presentations, they'll say data or they'll say data. So you end up with this like I don't know which one is correct. Now my wife tells me I say it wrong all the time. And I say, look, just because you're smarter than I am doesn't mean anything, okay?
That's funny. So the whole time you guys were talking, I was definitely thinking about the data thing. But one thing, you mentioned zero-party data or data. But just for those who may not have ever heard of that, zero-party data is consent data a user actively, shared with a brand or a publisher. And I've been hearing even some controversy on people thinking like there shouldn't be this term. It's sort of a new buzzword. But yeah, I just thought it was interesting that you mentioned it. And not everybody knows of that term when you mention it. So I just thought I'd pause there and bring it up. What do you guys think?
I mean, for me, it's a new term, right? Forrester coined it in 2020. And I think the actual definition is preference insights and purchase intentions given freely, right? They define it, they put it out in the market. And then I think, look, and this goes to the news that Jessie posted today, and I think it's a tie-in. 2020, third-party cookies were going away, right? Sky fell, everybody freaked out. And then that got pushed to 2021, 2022. Phlox got introduced. For everybody that doesn't know, Phlox was supposed to be a replacement to Google's third-party cookies, right? And Phlox, we would get grouped in flocks of people. Now, Google came out with a report on like, hey, Phlox are working amazing. Somebody was, I think a privacy watchdog group was like, hey, can we see those results? They didn't show them, probably because they were fueled in part by third-party cookies. Now we're in 2022. Everybody thought it was coming in 2023, and we're right back to 2024. The second piece before I want to hear from David is Google just announced its earnings. They're up, I think, another 13%, and 60 to 70% of their revenue for Alphabet still comes from ads. So I'm not going to point fingers, but you do the math there. David, I'd love your insight on that.
Yeah, well, first off, I like to say that flocks flopped. That's kind of, how I like to put it. But look, we've been talking about this a lot lately. Internally, we've been talking about it a lot today. The reality is that Google, they sort of keep moving the goalposts, because the reality is that the industry is not ready, and they know that. And the problem is that if they do it and make this change before the industry is ready, then a lot of fingers get pointed at them. There are already a lot of fingers being pointed at them, and with respect to antitrust, because look, their revenue keeps growing and everybody else's is going down. Look at everyone from Shopify to Facebook, Meta, whatever you want to call them. They're all having issues with respect to revenue going down because of targeting. And then you're seeing revenue going up for Google because everybody's saying, all right, well, I can't advertise there. I'll just advertise in Google because, I know I can get targeted there. And so there's a serious, that puts them in a serious position of what to do. Do they shut it off and risk, growing revenue, which is wonderful for them, right? But at the same time, then the government comes after them. They already have government issues, right? They don't need more. So the last thing they want is to end up in a massive antitrust suit that, causes, even more angst for them. And so they just keep moving the goalpost because the industry is not ready. We talked about this earlier. There's too many, one of the things that we wanted to talk about on this podcast is just about, what's going on in the industry, with respect to this whole transformation and cookie deprecation. And one of the things is that there's so many different IDs out there. You mentioned earlier about what's going to happen is Trade Desk UID 2.0 going to be the thing. Anyone who knows anything about that knows that it's not, because
It's just not.
all of the IDs that are out there, whether you're talking about their ID, LiveRamp's ID, anybody's ID, Lodame's ID,
Lodame, yeah.
they're all really, attempts to say, hey, we're trying here, but the reality is they're all dependent on some other ID. They're all dependent on emails or mobile IDs or IP addresses or something. And so none of them are the answer. And I keep telling people that what has to happen is a literal reinvention of how ad targeting works today in a way that will, correlate and still work with the existing programmatic platforms. And I do see a future there. We've talked about it a few times on our podcast, and I think it's all around one of the things that we've been talking about: transparency, being able to collect data in a transparent way with consumers, but doing it in a sort of centralized platform, like a consent management platform, where consumers can manage their consent in a single place. Because right now, how does it work? Like, you talked about, 10,000, but that site now has lots of information about you. But that's one website. And so if you're going to authorize 10, 20, 50, websites and apps to collect some data about you, then you have 50 different places that you have to manage that, right? And you have to dig through their privacy policies and try to find where the opt-outs are and what data they're collecting. It just doesn't work. So I think that a lot still has to happen to create a real transformation. And it's a complete overhaul of what we're experiencing today. But I think we'll get there. I think that, you're going to see, and this is going to, this change now that Google's made is going to give us a little more time, give the industry as a whole more time to figure out how that's all going to work.
Yeah, I mean, I think you brought up some good points. So the first one for me is you talked about antitrust. So if you look at Europe, right, much stricter with antitrust. They actually, bring them to justice in some ways. But if you've ever done programmatic advertising outside of the US, right? If you go, like I've done it in New Zealand, I've done it in Europe, it's so much stricter there on what you can do, right? Like it's not the same mechanisms you can do in the US. So I think that presents a lot of different challenges for marketers, right? Especially if you've got global programs. The second point that, again, which I think you kind of broached this, I think on Wednesday, or maybe Tuesday of this week, the House just passed the Privacy Act, right? I think it's the American Data Privacy and Protection Act. We don't know when it's going to go through, but it's supposed to be the most sweeping kind of privacy act. And there is actually Republicans and Democrats can agree on it, right? Big tech is in the crosshairs. So they can keep kicking this can down the road. But I think for the audience listening, the time is now, right? Like just like with Google Analytics 4, the time was probably 2 years ago when it first came out. Like everybody, it's human nature to wait until the last minute. If you can get ahead of that with zero party, figuring out how to work with first party, you're going to get ahead of the game. And I think that's something that the industry needs to do as a whole. My final point, and it kind of brought up the earlier topic of walled gardens. Look, there's been a big tech civil war, for lack of a better term, between Apple and Google. That's why 14.5 dropped. That's why Apple Relay is out, right? They pretty much kneecap Meta, right? You can look at what's going on with them. They're not the same company. And so within that, you also started to have publishers being like, hey, wait, like we have all this data. And that's like, BuzzFeed's a good example. 2 years ago, they rolled out Lighthouse, which is basically in my opinion, their DSP. And now they also incorporate Huffington Post, right? There are other organizations that have done that, like cybersecurity world, there's IDG, now Foundry. So there's no way that you're ever going to have it. Like, that's the thing, right? You're never going to have this identifier that cuts across all these different publishers that are putting up their own walls along with Google and Facebook. It's just the wild, wild west. And I think we'll get there. Marketers need to be cognizant of it, as well as business leaders.
Well, so here's my question is, if we know this is coming, why do we need to move the goalposts? Because this is coming, and we can look towards other, we mentioned the other countries and that actually already have this implemented, right? So it would seem simple to look at what they're doing and start adopting those best practices rather than trying to scramble and reinvent something or set something up. Worst case scenario is, and this is like actually a good case scenario for BDEX, several other companies, is going to the data brokers who have all this data and saying, hey, we're not quite set up on our end. We need your services.
Yeah, I think it's really, and I'll let David respond. It's legal, right? So it's easier to get things done in the smaller countries, from my opinion, and that's why you see those stringent, what I think are more stringent rules. With that being said, David, I'd love your POV on it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I agree 100% with what you just said, Pasha. And also to add to that, I think that you have to consider, like, US is Google's largest market. And so making that cutoff and not moving the goalpost puts a really big target on them. Right now, their revenue grew so much just, in this past year, that they really have to, be careful. If they don't move that goalpost, then, and the industry is not ready, then a lot of that revenue is going to move to them. And like I said earlier, as great as that may sound to them, growing revenue is always great. Not if it puts that target on your back. And that's exactly what would happen. So they actually need to allow the rest of the world, like, they want to be the superpower, but at the same time, they want everybody else to sort of have their own business going on too, right? And putting all of those other businesses at risk puts their whole business model at risk.
Absolutely. Well, should we switch gears?
Yeah, we could probably talk about this all day, right?
Yeah.
I still have it tied in a little bit to the next topic. So now we're just moving into advertising, and I added cookie deprecation delay in there. Figured it'd come up again. But specifically, we were going to talk about match rates for B2B audiences and potentially B2C. I know, Pasha, you wanted to talk about B2B primarily, but why is it important? And how can you win in today's market? And also, like, let's talk about like audience creation and identity graph solutions and outcomes. So let's go from
this
there.
is a topic near and dear to my heart. Been doing LinkedIn advertising probably for 7 years, and I've just seen it grow, right? That platform has always lagged behind. No offense to LinkedIn. I know we're on LinkedIn right now, but it has, right? From a UX perspective and just from a platform perspective, they've done a lot to catch up. That's a topic for another day. I work a lot with, B2B, right? We work anywhere from like C to Series B, and we work small, medium enterprise, even enterprise. This ties back into first party data, right? And if you have an audience in your CRM and you are running a SaaS organization, right? You need to make sure those folks don't churn. And so if we know somebody's coming up on an annual contract, let's say 10 to 12 months, and we have a segment in our CRM, why don't we pull that segment out and do something with it, right? And so what we do a lot with different clients is take their CRM data and ingest it into LinkedIn, or you can ingest it into Facebook, or you can ingest it into Twitter, right? Whatever it may be, programmatic. Pretty easy to do. Using LinkedIn as an example, I don't know about y'all, but my first company that I signed up 13 years ago is not my email. So we all sign up with a personal email, right? Well, what happens is when you go to match that audience, it doesn't compute. And so your match rates, usually I would say 40 to 50%.
Wow.
It's a big deal, and it gets compounded when you have an audience that's, let's just say 20,000 developers, right? And let's say some of those are senior leaders who only check LinkedIn 1 to 3 times a week. So you already know that you're going to probably be losing about 30% of that audience. You're not going to be able to reach all of it. So you won't be able to reach that total addressable market. That's a big problem because you're wasting money. Campaigns take longer to take hold and, kind of warm that cold layer. And so what do? Enter in identity graphs. I partner with a few, and I'm sure, David, we can talk about that. I mean, it's really the idea of taking a personal email address or taking a business email address. And in this case for LinkedIn, it's a business email address, right? Mm-hmm. You take that and it's going to match it with B2C identifiers. And those identifiers can be numerous, right? Let's just say it is, I'm going to say for now, it's email address and, a few others.
But is it like on LinkedIn, do people use their business email, you think?
No, I was going to say, it's the personal email on LinkedIn that gets it tripped up. Yeah. And
should.
Yeah. So if you have their business email, you're looking for their personal email so that you can actually find them on LinkedIn.
And that's the distinction. In your CRM, you'll have their business email. When you upload it to match it, it's going to be their personal email that they sign up with. So that just doesn't compute, drops the match rate. If you can append that through B2C, what happens is, and I do this pretty much bi-weekly, you get a match rate that's closer to 80, 90%. And so what does that do? That allows you to get to that retargeting layer a lot quicker because you're able to saturate that audience with the right frequency to actually get them to notice you and take the next step, right? Build trust, make them problem aware, solution aware, and then get them down to that decision level if that's what you want to do. I won't get into the landing page versus the feed. I'll leave that up to LinkedIn. But, that also cuts across B2C. The other place that becomes really important is Facebook. So for B2B, you used to be able to build a pretty robust audience with Facebook's data. With 14.5, this is no longer the case, right? So there's really 2 ways to go. You can retarget off your website, or you can actually take that audience, match it, ingest it into Facebook, and now you're hitting your CRM audience with 100% accuracy, give or take a few, across multiple channels. And I think for marketing leaders in today, look, with time to value, with investors, with the recession or not the recession coming, you've got to be very adept at doing this or you're not going to win, right? We talk a lot about winning and losing. A good way to lose is not to have a data strategy. And I think Jessie mentioned it, and she mentions it a lot, and it's that data culture, right? And that data culture has to be implemented across your organization. I think there's another term that Yusuf Foster uses, he's in a community, and you talk about it with him, Jesse, which is the democratization of data. You could look at that so many different ways. But an example for me is I'm a marketer, and last night I set up an integration between Segment and Snowflake. I have no business doing that, right? But with the advent of YouTube and tutorials, all of us in whatever role we're at, product, customer, sales and marketing, have this ability to utilize data in a way that we never did before, right? And so, it's powerful.
Absolutely. Great.
Yeah, good point.
So many good points. I feel like there were different times I was thinking a lot of different things, but yeah, all of that is good. And it's definitely a struggle between using the consumer emails and business emails. So I thought that was an interesting point that you wanted to discuss.
Yeah. See it a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even when you're working with consumer brands, then you'll run into that same sort of gridlock that we run into on the B2B side, where you have their consumer email, but you really want their business email.
Yeah, I mean, that's even a topic, it used to be in B2B, you would say, we don't want the personal email, right? But today, if you're not expecting, because here's the reality, all of us, and this is Refined Labs talking point, so I don't want to steal it, but if you want the data, just get a Zoom Info account, right? Or
exactly,
like you can get those email addresses anywhere. You can get them anywhere. And so the power of the email address isn't as much as I think having that interaction with a consumer, whether it's B2B or B2C.
Absolutely. That's kind of how we summarize the cookieless masterclass. Was it just comes back down to like the marketing basics, that people were using 100 years ago. And we got a little sidetracked with the internet and all these different data points that we get away from quality, really first party data. And that's why I was telling them, like, the best businesses and the best marketers are already doing what they need to be doing because they're optimizing their first party data. And then I talked about like politics and campaigns, and what we did really well in the Obama campaign was we focused on data, and we collected a lot of really good quality data that we were then able to utilize and use for personalization and targeting, and understanding our audience. So all really great points.
Yeah, he changed the game in terms of data collection. I remember like that his first campaign was a game changer. And out of that came, again, that kind of was the arms race between Republican and Democrat in terms of data, right? Like it always goes back to that. So it's interesting to see how it's all kind of played out.
Absolutely.
It's happening more with each election season. So it's only going to get, even more in the coming season with respect to how data is used.
Agreed.
Absolutely. Candidates will be completely left behind, just like brands, completely left behind if they're not optimizing their first party data, first party customer data, first party voter data, whatever kind of first party data it is.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, should we transition into that third topic? Are you ready,
Sure.
Josh?
Well, I just have a quick question before we do transition into that. Is what would be the benefit if you're looking for outreach, if you're looking to actually speak with somebody to make them make a decision, then what would be the benefit of having the consumer personal email versus business email? Because I know for me, there's, even when you're hitting spam, there's so much stuff that goes through my personal email that if somebody, whether it's in sales or marketing, is trying to get me to buy something or try something, I'm more likely to hit that delete button than I am if it comes through my business email, because I'm so used to more important things coming through my work email. So I'm more apt to check it if it's coming through my work email rather than my personal email. So I'm just kind of curious on why we would want to target the consumer email versus, or the personal email versus like the business email.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all use case, right? Like it all depends on the use case. That's marketing, right? It just depends. For B2B, you're going to work with some organizations that maybe run an older playbook, and they you're going to I talk to the CEOs, right? I hear it. Like, they want the gated content, they want the business email. It's a cultural thing. I don't really necessarily think it's one way is better than the other.
We call it the MQL hamster wheel, right, Pasha?
Yes, exactly. I mean, I think that's it. And I would just say, I think more modern organizations today might see it as they're just not, okay, think about a PLG motion, right? Product led growth. If we're targeting developers are notoriously, they're notorious about not wanting to be marketed to. And it's possible they just give a fake email address to sign up for the product. At the end of the day, we want them to experience that, because if the experience is good, if the product is good, there's a lot better chance it leads to a sale. So by weeding that out, you sometimes cut yourself off at the chase.
Great point.
Yep.
Okay, as far as the digital transformation, I'm kind of curious on the whole change management goes. I know that you, as we talked, you were in the process of setting up your own agency. So what was the process of why you wanted to do your own agency? And when you're talking about creating that culture, how do you keep the culture the way you want it to as your business starts to scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, my co-founder, Suzanne Block, is amazing. So shout out to her. Couldn't do it without her. I think both of us, we wanted a couple things, right? I think both of us really look at 3 areas for leadership. It's empathy, awareness, and impact. And I talk about this a lot. Empathy, just be empathetic in your day-to-day, right? With the people you interact with your customers. And then if you have employees, which one day we probably have, you want to be empathetic in your relationship with them. There's an element of awareness, right? You want to be aware of yourself. Like, you're not going to get to the next level without having self-awareness. Having self-awareness allows you to take criticism, which allows you to get better. And then the final piece is just impact, right? It's what's the impact that you're having on the people around you, and in the interactions you have. And I think the one thing I love about LinkedIn and that community, and I'll tie it back to this, is just, I think most people on there have all those qualities, at least the people that I talk to. I mean, I met both of you, Jesse and Josh, through LinkedIn, right? I think we share a lot of that same DNA. And so in starting our own agency, yeah, that's what we wanted. How does that culture transfer? To me, people make it about pizza parties and maybe, like, I don't know, giving you a gym membership. All that stuff is great, but when it hits the fan, it's about how you perform and how you carry out your duties, right? And do you do them in a way that's consistent with your values? A lot of organizations say they do, but they don't. And that's why you see everything that you're seeing now. You're seeing people leaving companies. There's no loyalty, but you have to ask yourself, why is that, right? So if you tie all those things together, it's really just about living your values, and you live those values through the work that you do, through not having, I've worked in organizations where they were allowed to do whatever they want, right? If you're a football fan, you might remember Terrell Owens, or a superstar that plays by his own rule book. That's okay. But what it does is it destroys the culture and morale around you. I'm sure we've all probably seen that. I would say probably, the only other thing, as we talk about digital transformation and how maybe that relates to it, is people think digital transformation is digitizing everything in your organization. And really, that's not it, right? At its core, it's understanding your business processes and how you can optimize those, right? How can you transform those processes? And then how can you infuse that into your culture so you create this culture to support digital transformation? I think you saw a lot of that during the pandemic with restaurants, right? Both in the restaurant industry, that thrived because they were able to transform the way that they serve. You had ghost kitchens coming up, you had delivery, and some of them thrived while others didn't. Now, you might say some of that's cultural, might say some of it's bad luck, but David, would love to hear from you, because I think you got a lot more experience in business than I do.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I've been doing this for more years than I'll want to share, but Amir actually said it in the comments. He said bad culture is top down. So I mean, it's really important. I've seen all kinds of leaders, and it's really important for leaders to understand the different personalities, not just personalities, but behavioral traits of all of their team members. We use a product called Culture Index, and I live and die by it. I hire by it, and, and in the culture index, basically, it's in some ways it's one of those, in some ways it's a personality test, but reality is it's more about culture, because it's more about understanding the sort of innate behavioral traits of a person, right? If you're a detail-oriented person, you're a detail-oriented person. You're not going to be a high-risk person. If you're a methodical person, you're not going to be a fast-paced person. And so you have to make sure that people are doing the tasks, their roles and responsibilities meet their natural innate behavior traits, right? Otherwise, you create stress on a person. If you create stress on one person, that creates stress on everyone around them, right? And we've made mistakes, we made a recent mistake, we make mistakes, you put someone in a role and you say, hey, here, help us out with this. And then you realize later, oh, wait, maybe that wasn't the right person to ask for that help on that task, but it's a tool that we go back to, and I go back to as a leader, and I use it to make sure that I understand what the best roles and responsibilities are for each individual in the company. Because if you put somebody in that wrong seat, even if it's just for a single task, you can, create, a lot of problems. And so I think that becomes even more important in sort of this digital transformation, because you have to understand that people are interacting in different ways now, right? And so they're not all sitting right next to each other. You're not able to huddle in a meeting all the time. And so it's important to make sure that, you understand, across the entire team, what that means and what that means for productivity and your ability. And once you get that sort of all synced up, it's amazing what you can do. Like it becomes, the whole company becomes this machine that just really works towards the common goals, and that's when you can grow and scale.
Yeah, that's really well said. I'd add to that, this does tie in, while it's not necessarily data. If you think about the idea of just revenue operations, right? It's very methodical in its approach. And part of that methodology is making sure you have the right tool stack to match, your business strategy, your go-to-market motion, your data model. That tool stack needs to have people that can use it, and it needs to have adoption. What we see at so many of these organizations, especially SaaS, is you've got like 20 to 40 apps, right? You've got people coming in and out, and then that person comes in and they're like, all of a sudden they're responsible for like 4 apps they've never heard of, as well as adapting to a culture that's so fast paced, right? Again, I talk about time to value. There's time to value in a product, but there's time to value from investors that want their return. When you do that, you're just going to create churn. And so that's why at a cultural level, it's so important, and it's so hard to do. But it's so important to align everybody as best you can. So, you have that process. I just talked to a client about this today. He was talking about, well, I'm going to do it. And I said, yeah, you're going to do it today, but you're head of BD. In 6 months, somebody's going to come into this team and they're going to need to know how to do it. So we need to build a repository to show them how to do it. Story for another day, but like this, it starts in those initial conversations. I'm obviously on the client service side, but I think internally, having those conversations, and that's where it just goes back to, again, transparency, being aware of the situation, being empathetic of that person coming in, and thinking, again, I think the other thing we talked about, which is a theme today, is we as humans are short-term thinking, right? We always think in the short term. With Google Analytics 4, with pretty much everything. And if you can take a long-term view of your business, which is really hard to do, I know I'm in it right now. Suzanne's probably chuckling on the line, but like, I'm always freaking out about our standard operating procedures and, our processes, because it's those frameworks that make me more confident going in front of a client. And if you don't have those built out, no matter what business model you're in, it's doomed to fail. So yeah, that's my soapbox.
Soapbox on digital transformation culture. That's interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Should we even get into that last topic? We've got 5 minutes here.
You can jump in.
All right.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean, we talked briefly about it, right? A little bit about, operationalizing first-party data. But I think that, and we talked about, first-party data, zero-party data, whatever you want to call it, or whatever you want to apply to it. It kind of works in a similar way when you're talking about applying it to programmatic, paid social. And you mentioned out of home. And so I think you did. It was in the notes. And so I'd love to get your take on that. We at BDEX, we've been touting that to our client base for probably the last 2 years, the importance of utilizing whether first or zero-party data, whatever it is, the data that you're collecting about your existing customer base, and how to leverage that, not just across programmatic, social, whatever it is, but not just to sort of retarget it to your existing customers, but also, we've talked a lot about using that, along with machine learning as well, so that you can use that to try to find more people just like your customers. And so I'd love to get your take on that, where you see that.
I mean, it's interesting. So I'm in the DC market. Prior agency, worked with a lot of government agencies. Display advertising in general is pretty maligned on LinkedIn. And there's reasons for that, right? Like if you're a B2B audience and you're running on mobile gaming inventory, you're probably wasting your money. Now, a lot of people know that, right? But there is an element of out of home in DC that prospers, right? And I think you see out of home prosper also with ClickUp and Airtable Wars. Again, Jesse kind of said this, like on LinkedIn, it's the 1% of the 1% fighting about the 1% of ideas, but old ways work, right? And there are principles to that. One of those principles is being exposed to a brand through out of home. In DC, you've got government workers. They get out of wherever they're going, right? They're still in office now. They've just been mandated to come back. And you can reach these folks through out of home. We've always found that it worked. We would see lift in website visits, correlations, all that. But what I realized right before the pandemic, I was having conversations about, and there's actually an organization called AdQuick. It's a DSP for out of home, right? So you can leverage first party data and you could target them on display wherever they may be. But then you can target them on paid social, but you can take that first party data and now target them out of home. So how powerful does that become when we think about an omni-channel experience, even though there's no retail involved, but just a multi-channel experience? The possibilities are endless. I would say when I first looked at it, there weren't a lot of markets, but I think now there are a lot more markets. And I think as we go forward, when we talk about operationalizing that first party data, it's having a data culture, right? Democratizing it internally, and then thinking about creative ways to use it, right? Like we don't have to be locked into one or the other, right? It can be both, right? Like display can work from some people and it can't work for others. It's the same thing with out of home. And so I haven't gotten a chance to do it. I would really love to test it out. And if you all ever, hear about it, I'd love to hear how it worked for you. There's one more point I wanted to finish off on before time runs out. And it was the idea of data clean rooms. And that kind of relates to first party data. It was one thing that I have not had experience with. I know BDEX does it. So I'd love to just hear like why it works and like how it could be used.
Absolutely. I mean, look, data clean room is literally just a way for you to be able to manage your data in a privacy compliant way that will interact with other data assets, okay, without them being shared.
Got it.
And so what happens is, like, we provide a data clean room. You can put that data, upload your first party, zero party data, whatever, into our platform. And then from there, you can connect it to other data assets. So what happens is it gets actually encrypted, and those encryptions are matched with encryptions in our platform with data from other sources. So let's say you upload an email address, let's just say by example from your CRM, and you're looking for more information about this person, whatever it is. It could be some data about them that some other company has. And you don't know what those other companies have, and you don't want to share this data because this is your data. You put it into the clean room, it gets encrypted, And then the encryption of that email address is now just a whole bunch of letters and numbers,
wow.
right? And it's matched with this encrypted data from other companies. And so it's using the same encryption method, so it can find that email address without having to share it. They're just sharing the encryptions. And now that it matches, and let's say it found a match with a company that has some other information, and you can go and you can acquire that information because you essentially already have the information on the consumer, or they have this information on the consumer as well. And you basically are making an agreement of how that information is going to be shared. In most ways, like the way we do it, that information is not actually passed to you. It's actually passed to a programmatic platform so that it can be used for advertising and targeting, but not necessarily shared. In a platform like Snowflake, you might do the same thing, but you may end up in sort of a second party agreement, right? Where as long as you have the sharing rights to that data, or whoever you're acquiring that data from has that sharing rights to share that data, then they can actually share that data with you through that, that capability as well. So the data clean room is just essentially, a way for you to match data with other data assets without actually having to send it to somebody and giving it to them to see it.
That's awesome. Yeah, something I'd like to test out. I never got a chance to, but I've been reading a lot about it. And know you guys did it.
Yeah.
We do. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Check it out. You can go to bedex.com, and if you click start for free, that'll take you to OmniIQ. We would love to hear your feedback, especially Pasha, just on like the look and feel and the usability. I mean, it's a new app, so all feedback would be welcome. But I think for that, we are now over time. Although Amir did ask about the ship. So is there an update on the ship?
There's no update besides the fact that it's still there. But I keep forgetting I was going to move some things around so I can put something else in focus. But a few more attendances, Amir. We missed you a couple of times. I think the past 2 weeks, and I was going to tell you that you're almost getting to the high attendance sort of portion of our show, where once you reach that threshold, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, we'll send you a little ship as a prize. So.
Oh, that's so funny. All right. Well, in closing, we would love to get input from listeners about BDEX's new podcast. Also, are there any guests you would like to hear from? We have a new podcast page on BDEX.com. So head on over to BDEX.com. You can click about in our menu and go to the Deconstructing Data podcast. And you can fill out the form there, and we'll love to talk to you about anyone you would like to suggest or nominate. And then also just let us know what kind of topics you would like to hear from. So your feedback's really important to us, your qualitative data, as I normally say. But thank you so much for being here, Pasha. This was a great discussion.
Yeah, this was awesome. Like I said, I've been listening for a while. Really happy to be on. And it's great to get another point of view on all this because it's moving so fast. So really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Right.
Thank you. And look forward to catching up with you again after this.
Definitely.
All right.